This session is more about concluding what we have discussed so far from day one to today, and maybe thinking about some resolutions on how do we digest, move forward after being empowered and acquiring more knowledge, which we think that we are now better than we came. So this session will have two moderators. One is Patrick Develtere and Nanavaty Reema. I would like to give brief biography of the two, starting with Patrick Develtere. Patrick Develtere is a father of 3 girls and happily married. That's what he said was more important, but second to that, he's the principal advisor for the European Social Policy at the European Policy Strategy Center, the in-house think tank for the European Commission. But before joining the EPAC, he was the president of the Belgian Christian Workers Movement, and which is one of the largest civil society networks in Belgium, with over 4.5 million members and 250,000 volunteers involved in the trade union, mutual societies, and the civil society activities. Patrick also teaches politics and the society in the developing countries and international development cooperation at the University of Leuven, that is in Belgium. Earlier, he was the director of SEWA, Research Institutes for Work and Society at the same university. Patrick has a PhD in social sciences and has been a visiting professor at the University of Saskatchewan, that is in Canada, the University of Quebec, that is in Montreal, still in Canada, and at the University of Kinshasa, that is in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and this is among others. And from 2010 to 2017, he was a member of the board of the European Social Observatory. And what is more particular and interesting about Patrick Develtere, any book from the ILO around 2009, 2010, most likely he will be the author or the co-author. In one of my presentations I did when that we are talking more about the cooperative renaissance in Africa, and that particular term was coined by Patrick Develtere together with Professor Wanyama. So he has intense experience and knowledge of the cooperative movement, and more so in Africa. So please, can you clap for him? This is my second time and chance to introduce none other than Nanavaty Reema, a well-established speaker, but also a great social activist. Reema Nanavaty has been working for the SEWA since over 35 years, spanning its membership from over 1.5 billion members and making it single largest union of informal sector women workers. Reema facilitated rebuilding lives and the livelihood of about 60,000 earthquake-affected rural women and 40,000 affected members. She's leading the rehabilitation program in Afghanistan and Sri Lanka, providing professional training in rural livelihood security for war-affected widows. Reema oversees 4,813 self-help groups, that's quite a lot, 160 cooperatives, and 15 economic federations. She's and these organization plans, they are pan-Indians, meaning they cut across the state in in India, spanning from more than 16 states. She's also involved in other South Asian countries, focusing on women economic empowerment and building women-owned enterprises. She has led also the supply chain in introducing modern ICT-based tools and facilitating green energy initiatives and livelihood. Reema currently is a member of the Advisory Council on Gender of the World Bank Group. She also has been a member of the International Labour Organization's High-Level Global Commission on the Future of Work. And she has also agreed to come and help us here in Africa. Please join me in congratulating and welcoming Reema. Without further ado, I would like now to call upon Patrick Develtere to please take the stage. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sifa. You hear me? Thank you so much, Sifa. And we'll stand up because we want to be flexible. That means that we'll take into account what you think, but also what you have said the previous days.
Hi, Patrick. So I hope you have all the energy and the, positive vibes of the last 3 days of deliberations. How do you feel about it today?
Well, I'm thrilled. I'm very happy to be here, but also I'm thrilled because I know that cooperatives leaders are very vocal. Mm-hmm. So I'm afraid that we will be contradicted many times for what we will say.
Definitely, definitely. I think, and yes, Patrick, it was very interesting and enriching conference. So what do you think about it?
Well, I think it was very timely that we had this conference, because we do not live in a world anymore where you have the North and the South, them and us. We are living in times in an era of globalization. It means we are all in the same boat. And with globalization, of course, come a lot of collective challenges, common challenges, and we have been discussing a lot of those challenges. We have the challenge, of course, of rising inequality in all societies, North and South. We have the challenge of the climate change and the environmental degradation, which is also happening North and South. We also have new geopolitics, and by the way, I just learned that we probably will have an agreement between the European Union and the British about the Brexit. But geopolitics are changing very, very fast. So increasing mobility also is also an interconnectivity, digitalization are common challenges. And these are challenges also for us as a cooperative movement. So the interesting thing of the previous days was that we have been discussing this. What does it mean for us? But I have the same similar question for you. I mean, this was a networking conference also. It was not only about listening to people who were in the panels. It was also a question of networking. What are your major takeaways, and how do you feel?
So I think this was really a great conference. I got to meet several of the cooperative leaders and cooperative movements, both from Asia Pacific, Caribbean, from Latin America, of course from Africa as well. And I think what was really very encouraging was to see that, the commitment of the cooperative movements, the cooperatives, also, how giving more and more emphasis on women's leadership, women's participation, and also thinking about what is in store for the youth, and for the young people who are going to pay the way. However, I think there are also a few major challenges that the cooperatives do realize and have highlighted as well, like the climate change, the digital and the advanced economy, the fast-growing platform economy. So I think, Patrick, you know very well the cooperative movement in Europe, and also you have studied the cooperative movement in Africa, but you also are an expert on the cooperative movement globally. So, what do you think was this conference like, to look into a mirror? What is your major highlights in terms of what takeaways are or what conclusions we can draw?
That's a difficult question, but my feeling is, and you don't have to agree, but my feeling is that we have gone through a very long political wave. Since the 1980s, we have gone through a wave of neoliberalism, where we were to believe that there would be a trickle-down effect and everybody would benefit from neoliberalism. It has not been the case. During that wave also, we were taught to believe that we would have stability in the financial sector. But what we have seen is volatility. And so we see that we are in shambles in many economies and in many societies. And I think this is at the same time a challenge, but also an opportunity for cooperatives. I think that cooperatives, and this has been, I think also what I heard over the few days that we were here together, cooperatives are always there to correct what is going wrong. But cooperatives are also there also to detect what the alternatives can be. And I was very happy to hear a lot of the alternatives that have been developed already, like cooperatives as being a lab for trying to find out how we can have another economy and another society. And so I think this is really good. And we have done it in a very critical way. It was not self-congratulatory. It was really trying to find out, okay, is this really an alternative? Do we really correct? Do we really find out how this society and economy can be reorganized in the next couple of years and the next couple of decades?
So, shall we all come together and begin the final and the concluding session? I just would like to share some of the basic objectives of the session, that we all have been here together for the last 3 days as a community. We have been sharing our experiences, networking, learning from each other, and based on all those discussions, we have tried to draw some major conclusions. But I think we are not a statutory body here that, we come here to give suggestions or recommendations, but we will be drawing from all the discussions and the summary of what we have, gone through of all the different sessions, and we would propose it to the, to the Congress, and it is up to the Congress to decide whether they would like to take in part of it or full of it or just sit on it. But I think we are here to draw the conclusions of all the different sessions, and I'm sure that we haven't really deliberated, which was useless. But definitely, I think what we deliberated in the last 3 days is paving the way forward for the growth of the cooperative movement world over. And that's what has been the charging moment for us today. So, Patrick, how do you suggest we go about it?
Yeah, I think this is what we could do. I mean, we have been preparing a text over the last night and this morning, together with the great staff of the ICA, by the way. And I would suggest that we look at the text, go through the text together, and then we will have room for reactions from your side. And I would ask you to make reactions that refer to the discussions that you have had and do not add new things. And by the way, we don't have to look at the text itself, because after this discussion that we will have with you, the staff of the ICA will rewrite the text. So then we will have 2 documents indeed that we can submit to the ICA. We will have the summary of the different sessions, and then we will have a kind of a conclusion about the things that we really think that matter for the cooperative sector and maybe also for other stakeholders. So I suggest that we go through the text.
Let me start while it comes. Oh, here it comes. And I think our final conclusions that we are drawing from the 3 days deliberations are that cooperatives do play a very important role in the growth and development, in meeting the sustainable development goals globally, and therefore, creating this planet, a peaceful planet, a happy planet. And, we reaffirm the international statement on the identity of the cooperatives and the major role that it plays, and that's what has been the founding statement that we all agree to when it comes to meeting the 17 SDGs and the interdependence that all the cooperatives have to play in order to come up with an enterprise model. And I think we do agree to a multi-stakeholder partnership that is required to achieve the SDGs by 2030. And I think this conference on cooperatives for development, it acknowledges the plurality of the stakeholders participating thereon. And some of the major concluding points we would just discuss and deliberate now.
So we have thought that we should have two sections. One is, in fact, messages that are relevant for the cooperatives themselves and for the cooperative movement, so for the individual cooperatives and for the movement as a whole. And then a second part is messages that we think that other stakeholders like governments and international organizations maybe should address.
So I think let me start by the first suggestion that we all, or the concluding point, is that cooperatives do foster the value of openness, inclusiveness, and it also encourages multi-stakeholder partnerships to enhance the impact of local communities. And it also helps us in addressing global challenges such as the emerging climate emergency, the rising inequality, the gender disparity, the future of work, and the unfair value chains. And it also helps in peace building. So cooperatives do play a very major role in that. Yeah, Patrick?
Yes, secondly, we have, of course, these SDGs that are very central and that will be much more central in the future also of what the cooperatives and the cooperative movement want to do and want to achieve, because we want to contribute to that global agreement on the SDGs. Now, for that, of course, you need education and training and disseminate also the information and try to attract attention to those SDGs. But more important also for us, I think, is that when we communicate and when we educate, we have to have an alternative for the traditional education. Because now, as soon as you enter the kindergarten, you learn how to compete. And when you go to primary school, you learn even more to compete. Secondary school, also you learn to compete. At university, you learn to compete. We have to make for a system where you learn to cooperate, which is an alternative. So how can we indeed make sure that when kids go to the kindergarten, that they learn to cooperate? And when they end up with a university degree, they have learned to cooperate.
And likewise, as Patrick was saying, I think we all have been facing the wrath of the climate change and what it does to our members as well as but to the nation as a whole and to the community. And therefore, I think what we all wanted was to ensure that we include in the provisions to promote climate actions in these statutes so that we strengthen the implementation of these principles which affect us quite a lot.
The other thing is women's leadership, and I know what it's all about. As Sifa has said, I have 4 women at home, so I'm always in the minority, so I know what it is, women's leadership. So, but we have to embrace it. As a cooperative movement, we have to embrace it, and we have to accept it. It has been said several times that we are not good at it as yet. We make progress, but still we have to advance in having more women in the boards of directors, more women presidents of cooperatives. So the leadership has to transform towards more gender equality. And that will be good, because we all know that when an enterprise, an organization, or a cooperative, when you have more women participation and leadership, that you perform better, because they have other talents than men sometimes have. So this is the next point that I think we have seen and heard in many sessions.
Likewise, I think we want the cooperatives and the cooperative movement to contribute enormously to nation building, and therefore we want our cooperatives and the movements to become more and more inclusive. And therefore, how do we remove the societal inequalities? How do we maintain and also strengthen the democratic practices? Bring the poor and the vulnerable more into the leadership, and our cooperatives become more and more participatory, and therefore, how do we therefore work towards ending poverty and meeting the SDG 1?
What also surfaced in many of the sessions was the fact that we have a principle on cooperating between cooperatives, but that very often we're not very good at it. Whilst the conventional companies, like multinationals, they're very, very good at cooperating. So we as cooperatives, we should really reflect and see how we can indeed cooperate more amongst each other. Like yesterday, somewhere in one of the sessions, it was said that cooperatives that are involved in housing cooperatives, should and can benefit from cooperation with cooperatives that are working on renewable energy. So together you can do more. Of course, if we then say that we will do more, we also have to prove that we do more. And this is why there has been very often mention of the fact that we need data. We need to be able to show to ourselves, but also to show to the external world that cooperatives, in fact, indeed, are advancing in promoting the realization of the Sustainable Development Goals.
And finally, I think in order to meet with all those suggestions or conclusions, I think what we need is innovative financing and training mechanisms, services, which would provide access to the youth which are coming forward, which would enhance and build the entrepreneurial capacity of the youth so that, we become a transformative we build, the cooperative movement builds a transformative and an inclusive society where everybody has meaningful, productive job or work in their hands, and that leads to a peaceful planet.
So this is what we think, Reema and myself, as being the major conclusions regarding the cooperatives itself. And if you want me to summarize, I would say that in fact it is a major plea that we have heard over the few days that we were together to break out of the silos. We have silos, financial cooperatives, housing cooperatives, agriculture cooperatives, etc. So we have to break out and cooperate more with each other. But if we want to be a relevant actor internationally in order to reach the Sustainable Development Goals, we also have to break out of the cooperative silo. And we have to work increasingly with other actors who are also trying to attain the Sustainable Development Goals. You have the environmental movement, you have women's organizations, farmer unions, workers' unions, NGOs. So let's work with those people and see how, together with them, and even with local authorities and traditional enterprises, see how we can work with them to achieve the ambitious goal of reaching those SDGs by 2030.
So shall we now move to what we all discussed in the last 3 days? What could be our suggestive conclusions to the governments and the intergovernmental actions? And the first and the foremost thing that we all feel, because we have been so effective in meeting, and the role that we have played in achieving the SDGs. And not only because we are cooperatives and we believe in certain democratic principles and values, but we work at different levels. We work at the local level, the national level, and at the international level. And therefore, the governments and the intergovernmental agencies do need to decide the importance, and the effective role that the cooperatives have been playing.
Yes, indeed. And I mean, this is also a message for the governments and the international organizations that we are there. We have proven over the last 100 years that we can indeed make for a change. And we are already proving that we can also make for a change towards the Sustainable Development Goals. So we ask the governments and the international organizations to recognize that we can do something, but therefore, of course, we have to be strengthened. I mean, we have our strengths, but we also have our weaknesses. So we would like them to help us to get stronger, to develop capacities, to get insights in what has to be done and to get insights in what we can do.
And since as cooperatives we play such an important and relevant role in meeting the SDGs, I think what we would like the governments also to do is to examine and report periodically on the existing legislations and regulatory frameworks which the governments come up from time to time, which relate to the cooperatives, and not just the governments, but also look at what are the basis of relevant ILO's conventions, recommendations and declarations. How are they being made effective in our respective countries, or whether they are being implemented intergovernmentally as well, and how they reinforce the key role that the cooperatives play, in particular in the transition from the informal to the formal economy and in fight against inequalities and addressing poverty, to make our societies more inclusive societies.
Yes, of course, and then we also have to ask the governments to examine and report periodically on the existing legislation and to look really critically at that legislation. To what extent does it permit us to do what we have to do? And we have great anchors for that. We have the ILO recommendation on cooperatives, which is a very great instrument that has been influential already in so many countries to revise the legal framework that is there for the cooperatives. So we call upon the governments to not just say, okay, we have changed our legislation 15 years ago, so we are there. We don't have to do anything anymore. No, we ask them to sit down together with the cooperative sector and look critically at the enabling environment, the legislative environment.
And I think we also had one other suggestion that came out from the 3 days of deliberations, and that is to look at how do the governments collaborate with the cooperatives within the countries, with the cooperative movements globally as well, to enhance and build the capacities so that we work on adhering gender equality and also empowerment of women, as women also play a very major and important role in this society as well.
But governments can even do more. And we have heard it over the few days that we were together. Governments can really be very supportive for the cooperatives and create an environment and create instruments. Access to markets through public procurement, for example, access to finance. Governments can also create support, business development support systems, etc. So that also we ask them to do. And what we also think, and it came up several times during the sessions, is that governments are there also to integrate the idea of cooperation instead of competition, as I said, into the curricula, so that people learn that you can also advance while cooperating, not only while competing with each other, and that cooperatives have that as their DNA.
And finally, I think one of the suggestions was that the governments ensure sustained political commitments towards an enabling environment for a multi-stakeholder policy dialogue, acknowledging the very fundamental and the important role that the cooperatives play as key actors of development at all levels in a country as well. So, Patrick.
Let's move on with the discussion.
Yeah.
I mean, as we said, we were not in every session. We got the resumes of all the sessions and went through it. We didn't sleep very much last night. And this is what we thought we could conclude. But we are open for debate. So if you have a suggestion to add something, not a wording, but to add something, that you have heard or that you have sensed in one of the sessions, please come up with it. And I would suggest that you take 2 minutes, be very precise, very concrete, and it has to be something that doesn't overlap with what we already have. So who would like to intervene? I already see 2 people who want to intervene, 3 people who want to intervene. Okay, let's start with them. The lady first. Present yourself, please.
Thank you very much. I'm Nomvula Makhohlo from the South African government. And just to appreciate that the declaration actually puts concrete recommendations for governments. So it will make things easy for me to report to my government. But secondly, I've seen one of, I'm not sure, the points are not numbered. This one which talks about, I think it's partnership with, this one, this very one. I'm aware that in many countries we have cooperatives for professionals, co-ops for pharmacists and so on. But in some of us in our countries it's not rife. So I was proposing that if the meeting does agree, we also specify, that includes professional organization, professionals, co-ops for professionals. But secondly, you are talking about there's a point, I think it's below that, which talks about the ILO conventions. I would recommend that we also say conventions, because we also have Beijing Plus conventions and so on. So I understand that the ILO is with regards to formalization of the informal, but I think we must also take into consideration other conventions for gender equality and so on.
Okay, we have Santos, who is in the back, and he will change it accordingly. So the idea indeed that we also have to look at other international conventions, like what you say, the Beijing Convention. But can I please ask you that we do not try to change the text, but we try to add. Okay? We try to add items that we have not dealt with because we were not omnipresent, right? What your second remark is concerned about the professionals, there also Santosh can add something, but can you formulate it? Just one sentence. What would you write down?
Or maybe we can request you to write it down and hand it over to Santosh.
Yes.
So that, we give more time to other speakers. Thank you.
Excellent, Reema. Mm-hmm. There were more, the young man there.
Good, thank you. Leonard Okello from Uganda. Can I go back to that on the cooperation among cooperatives? While you were discussing, you actually said very useful words that are missing from the recommendations.
Thank you. What did I say that was useful?
And for instance, I'm going to go back to the beginning of that, please. I'll just give you 1 or 2 examples so it can be helpful. Yeah. Back to the first. Okay. When you talk about fighting societal inequalities, you mentioned a very important item, nation building.
Definitely.
I come from a country where cooperatives are the ones that handed over independence to us. And that's the process of nation building. Nation building is missing from the beginning of the sentence, which is so key to these societal inequalities.
I think we can make an extra paragraph on that.
No, it would be actually a starting steps were like to...
Which leads to nation building.
Okay.
Which leads to nation building.
Which leads to nation building, which is important because you miss the bigger picture of what the overall impact of that societal inequalities issue.
Okay.
Then there is another thing up there. The question of data. I think data is such a big issue, both lacking in the cooperatives at the grassroots, particularly, and between cooperatives, that I think it would be good if it became a major point of its own, rather than being a sub of the learning issue. because I think the data is really missing, both inside the cooperatives, and the use of it is even worse. And between cooperatives and merging them to raise national trends and analytics, which can be useful for decision making, is really missing. So I think data is too important for it to be a sub, and in the sentence, a sub of that. I think it should be a full bullet of itself.
Okay.
So we can explain what its role is for cooperatives.
Okay. I really appreciate the two suggestions so far. Can I ask you, or can we ask you, to refer to what has been discussed? We're not opening a new discussion on cooperatives and how we will change the world. In fact, we are summarizing what has been discussed during the different sessions that we had. So please, if you can, make reference to that discussion that you have had and say, Reema, Patrick, you forgot what we have discussed over there. Huh?
Just 1 minute, brother. Patrick, there's a hand over there and there's a hand over here as well. So maybe after you follow with her and then with you from Nepal. Please.
Me?
Yep.
Yes. Buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Rodolfo Orozco de Guatemala, de la Confederación de Cooperativas.
I am from the Guatemala Cooperative Federation. I think that these conclusions are quite relevant, and I don't want to add anything, but I'd like to listen to the recommendation where we require governments to support us with new cooperative laws and frameworks. And I'll tell you why. In Guatemala, in the last months, the Congress of the Guatemalan Republic passed last week a law on cooperatives without any of us participating in the draft. And when you read such documents, I'd like to add that we should coordinate drafts of laws with cooperatives, because just a recommendation, the way it shows here, the Congress of the Republic of my country will say, well, right, I see it, but if you who belong to the ICA are asking for us to reform or to update laws, then we are answering. We're already passing a law. So, in conclusion, I think that we should specify the fact that any law, any rule should be coordinated, and that cooperatives should be consulted. In Latin America, we've seen other cooperative movements which are imposed laws, and rules are modified, fiscal laws are modified, and they are not at all listened to. There's no consultation with cooperatives. So I think that such a recommendation is not enough. We need to specify that any law, any rule, any policy from the government should be done after consultation with the cooperative movement. I'm sorry to say it this way, but I really wish this recommendation to be modified this way, because if not, we could not support it. Thank you very much. I also think that it is quite important to mention it. So I
think that whenever there is talk about changing the legislation, that in fact the initiative should come from the cooperative sector. If not, the government has to consult right from the beginning the cooperative sector, and there cannot be any new legislation that is not endorsed by the cooperative sector. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thanks to both of you. I'm Mirai Chatterjee from SEWA's Cooperative Federation. Really appreciate and strongly endorse all of these recommendations. But I have a small suggestion as well. I think this, all the sessions and the plenary brought out a rich harvest of examples of what works and also what doesn't work, what are the challenges. So just to strengthen these, to add on, I wonder if we can also suggest some examples that are workable, maybe have them like small case studies, because governments always want to know what works, what doesn't work. Of course, context is important, but for example, we've learned from the example of Rwanda and also other countries like Italy, Japan, and so many others. So, the way the governments have created an enabling environment, whether it's giving land or reducing taxes and so on and so forth. And that is a struggle that many of us in our home countries are undertaken. So I think the richness of the examples that we had in the breakout sessions and the plenary would be very useful.
Okay, thank you so much for that. I would like to suggest two things on that. One is that indeed we make mention of the fact that we have success stories and that the ICA will collect them, those success stories. But the second thing, because you also said in the beginning that we also have our failures. So I would suggest that we add a paragraph for the cooperative movement also to look into the things that have gone wrong, what didn't work, the mistakes we made, so that we have also a critical look at ourselves. And not only be self-congratulatory and that we would also have a critical attitude towards our own workings.
So I think we have two suggestions, one to the cooperatives as well as one to the government. Just 1 minute. Our brother from Nepal would go and then we'll come back to you, please. Anybody's keeping time?
Thank you very much. Very interesting, this session. Thanks to the Shepa and Patrick. I want to mention in the here, our SDG program, we have only 10 years remain, 2030. Yesterday, from Iran, Dr. Hosseini reports 7.95 million people are total hunger, and 2 billion population of the world are malnutrition. See, very terrible and serious situation in the world. Mostly South Asia and Africa is most affected. Something is all over the world. In this conference, we must, how we can overcome the SDG coming 10 years, because January is not so far. I think other point we must include in the conclusion that poverty is not only economic poverty. Humanitarian poverty is also very serious in the world. Not only gender equality, not only so many types of inequality in the world. So multidimensional poverty reducing program in our conference must be decided, most important. I from Nepal. My name is Keshav Badal, Chairman of National Cooperative Federation. In Nepal, sometimes before, Oxford University and National Planning Commission of Nepal research in all the 7 provinces, where is the cooperative dense, there is multi-dimensional poverty graph is low. Where is cooperative is weak, there is multi-dimensional poverty is high. I think in India also, I think UP, Bihar, Jharkhand, Andhra, there is multi-dimensional poverty is high. And Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Punjab, Haryana, Himachal Pradesh is multi-dimensional poverty is low. So, how we can overcome within SDG in the coming 10 years? Not so many time we have. So, in our conclusion, you must include the multi-dimensional poverty reducing program in this conclusion.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, brother. And I think indeed we can add something, because it has been discussed in many occasions, we can include something that the cooperative sector, but also the governments, have to take into account that the situation is extremely serious. But not only in terms of poverty, but also in terms of sustainability. The situation is serious, and it will be very difficult to reach 2030 with success. The second thing that you mentioned about multidimensionality, I think there we can put a paragraph and say that the cooperative sector, but also the governments, have to recognize that cooperatives are working on different SDGs, and that by working together on different SDGs, the cooperative sector can indeed be a major vehicle to reach them.
Yeah, you brother, and then followed by.
It would be good to add. It would be good to add after fight against inequalities, we can add discrimination. I think it's important because there are several ILO recommendations and conventions and recommendations on discrimination. And in addition, I think it's our social responsibility to deal with child labor for the future. It's the cooperative's social responsibility. And if we add somewhere promotion of decent work, because it is the future of the employment on the basis of future decent work, I think we should add promoting decent work as part of the social responsibility. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Santosh will take that into account and change accordingly. Can we really ask to bring things that you can refer to the discussions that you have had? So it's not this exercise is not about adding things that you all of a sudden think about, but refer to what have been discussed.
After brother, maybe you could take.
Buenas tardes a todos.
Yes, good morning. I am Juan Martín. I come from Argentina. And you've mentioned here something which I think is of utmost importance. You said that our failures, our weaknesses, and our successes must be mentioned. I would like an ICA that establishes clear rules for us to act upon governments. Why? Because politicians are lying to us, or they have interests which are completely opposite to the interests not only of cooperatives, but also of the rest of society. So I would like this document to make very clear, I haven't read all the conclusions, right, but I would like here to be stated clearly that the interventions that cooperatives make to have an impact on governments at a local, regional, national, and international level is of the utmost importance. Thank you very much.
This will be the last speaker of the day today.
I think that indeed we already mentioned the fact that this needs a multi-stakeholder approach, but what you said is very correct. You need a whole-of-society approach and a whole-of-government approach if we want to reach the SDGs.
Hello. My name is Sissel Grimstad. I come from the University of Newcastle in Australia, and I'm working in education, co-op education. I wondered if we could strengthen the clause on education and actually with mentioning that we need skills in collaboration, democratic decision-making, and good governance. I think it would be important to do that because we see again and again that these are the three major areas that are problematic in some cases. Also, I think, as Patrick very rightly said, there is a wave and a focus on competition everywhere. I really do think we need to focus on collaboration, also in education. So I would really strengthen that. Thank you.
Okay, let's indeed add something on skills, and I would also say on talents, because people are not born only with skills, people are born with talents, and people want to do something with their talents. We have to close, I'm afraid.
That's right. So would you like to say some of your major takeaways of the session and of the conference?
I think, this was a great session, and the fact that so many different people raise their hands and also want to contribute is an indication to that, and I would really like to thank you for that. You can always give a written comment as well, but we have to close the session because there's a time constraint that we are facing. And I think this session is reflecting, in fact, the vibes that we have had during this whole conference. And as I said in the beginning, and as we said, we really are a community of cooperators that have been reflecting among each other, and I think we have done so very critically. We have a number of advantages as cooperatives, and we can make a major contribution, but we also have to be critical because we also have our weaknesses, and so we have a lot of homework to do as individual cooperatives, but also as a cooperative movement. And I think this is what will be transmitted to the statutory bodies of the ICA, and I think, and I hope, but I'm convinced that they will take into account whatever has been said here. And this is the way also we break the silos, because this is what we have been doing the last couple of days. We have not been saying that it's only about agriculture cooperatives because of hunger. We have not said it's only about renewable cooperatives because of the sustainability and environmental challenges. We have not said it's only about this, that, and the other. No, we have said this is the whole package. And to tackle the whole package and to really do something about the whole package, we have to break out of our silos.
And I think for me it was very exciting that, the cooperatives are still a relevant means of creating meaningful, productive work for the younger population of the world, the youth of the world. And I think, as Patrick has been saying, if we break the silos and start working in partnerships, cooperatives would definitely throw out new models of businesses, which are needed today in this new age economy. And I think the third important thing is the cooperatives still preserve the values of democracy, of trusteeship, equality, and therefore I do firmly believe it will lead to nation building as well. What our founder always tells us is that cooperatives work in correlation of work and worker, their families, community, and the environment, and therefore I think a peaceful planet. So I think the cooperatives do have a potential to create a peaceful planet, a great future of work that is just, secure, dignified, and full of hope. I would also like to therefore thank us, all of us as well, for the participation. I would also like to thank,
Well, we don't only have to thank you, you also have to thank each other. So look right and left, and let's all say thank you. Thank you.
We thank the translators, we thank the rapporteurs, and before I hand over to Dr. Sifa, in India we never end without singing a song. So we will all say, we shall overcome, we shall overcome, we shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, we do believe we shall overcome someday. Woo! Thank you so much. Thank you, Patrick.
Very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Three.
3 kisses.
I learned one thing. Belgians have to have 3 kisses.
To start with.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Please, you can. I hope you can clap more than that. There have been. I was very much impressed by the combination. Beautiful combination. Thank you very much.
Thank you.